In a galaxy fractured by fear and ambition, two souls from opposing worlds are forced into an alliance neither of them asked for. She was born to lead, trained by a system built on secrets. He was created to fight, discarded by a government that feared what it made. When fate throws them into the shadows of betrayal and the fires of war, they must choose between duty and truth, between what they were and what they could become. This is not just a story of survival. It's a story of defiance, of love found in the ashes of conflict, and of a spark that may one day change the stars. Welcome to Echoes Between Stars. The air inside the spaceport terminal reeked of scorched fuel and the mingling aromas of a dozen alien cuisines. Lights flickered overhead, casting the crowd in pale pulses of artificial daylight. Nisra moved through it all like a shadow wrapped in cobalt skin, her white hair tucked beneath the hood of her travel cloak. Each step she took was calculated, silent, the soft chime of armor beneath cloth betraying her military roots. She hated being here, among noise, among Terrans. Especially now, when every nerve in her body told her to remain hidden. But this wasn't about comfort. It was about survival. At the edge of the bar, she spotted him. Slouched in a corner booth, drink in hand, Daxon looked like 100 other human mercenaries. Rough-edged, unshaven, ex-military with too much time spent planetside. But Nisra had studied his profile. Former Ghost Division. No known affiliations. Zero loyalty, but a reputation for walking out of missions no one else returned from. She slid into the seat across from him without invitation. Daxon didn't flinch. He glanced up, eyes steel gray, flicking over her with the sharpness of a combat scanner. Assessing, weighing, judging. His hand never left the glass, but Nisra noticed the tension in his forearm. He was ready. Not polite. Not deferential. Just prepared. I expected someone taller, he muttered, voice rough from too many silent missions. I expected someone sober, she replied, though the words lacked venom. Her fingers rested on the table, close but not reaching. Close enough to show control. They stared at each other for a beat too long. Two predators scenting the air, not for blood, but for intention. He broke the silence first. You came alone. That's either bold or stupid. Both, she answered. Another beat. Then Daxon leaned back, the leather of the booth creaking. So, Commander Nisra, what hell are you dragging me into? She didn't smile. Instead, she reached into her cloak, retrieving a secure chip. One-way mission. High-risk escort. You'll be well compensated. He eyed the chip, then her. You always hire Terrans to do your dirty work? She met his gaze evenly. Only the ones who don't die easily. And just like that, the deal was in motion. The bartender slid another glass across the table, but Daxon didn't touch it. He kept his eyes on Nisra, his fingers drumming an idle rhythm on the polished surface. The beat wasn't random. It was coded, deliberate. A military habit from a man who'd never fully left the field. Nisra recognized it, but said nothing. Instead, she let the silence stretch, gauging his patience. It didn't take long for him to speak. You said high risk. I need specifics. No, she replied calmly. You need plausible deniability. That's what I'm offering. His brow lifted slightly, amused. You're not the first client to think secrets make a job more appealing. They don't. They make people dead. She slid the credit chip halfway across the table. It gleamed in the dim light, its value encoded and undeniable. Half now. The rest when we reach dock point 17 tomorrow at 0500. If you're not there, I hire someone else. Daxon didn't reach for the chip. Triple my standard rate. Hazard clause. Emergency extraction coverage. And I picked the route. That's not negotiable. It is now. He leaned forward, voice low. You're military. Xariun elite. You don't hire a Terran unless things have already gone to hell. His words stung, not because they were wrong, but because they were precise. She considered walking away. Pride told her to. Duty told her to stay. Nisra's jaw tightened. Fine. Double your rate. Emergency extraction included. But I command the ship. 3/4 up front, he countered. You vanish on me. I want it to be worth the regret. She stared at him for a long moment. The steel in his voice didn't come from arrogance. It came from survival. Ghost Division survivors didn't bluff. They negotiated like they were bleeding out, quick, clean, no emotion. Nisra placed her palm on the scanner embedded in the tabletop. The chip flashed green, funds transferred. Point 17. My vessel. Fully armed. Be ready. Daxon finally took the chip, sliding it into a wrist slot. One last thing, he said, rising. I don't take orders well. Nisra stood too, her posture like a drawn blade. You'll follow mine, or you won't walk off the ship. His smile was almost genuine. Now that's the commander I was expecting. They walked away in opposite directions, both knowing that whatever lay ahead would challenge not just their skill, but their allegiance. The hum of Nisra's ship reverberated softly through the deck plating as she moved down the central corridor, her footsteps steady and precise. The vessel was modest by Xariun military standards, fast, quiet, and heavily shielded. Perfect for a mission that didn't officially exist. In the cargo bay, Daxon stood with his arms crossed, already familiarizing himself with the layout. He didn't ask for permission to explore. That was expected. Mercenaries didn't care for formality, especially ones like him, ghosts of Terran wars, forged in backwater skirmishes and forgotten black ops. You didn't say much back at the bar, he said without turning. Just enough to get me on board. So tell me now, what am I really walking into? Nisra hesitated. The words felt heavier here, surrounded by silence and metal. She stepped forward and activated the containment lock on a secured panel embedded in the bulkhead. A hiss of compressed air escaped as the compartment slid open, revealing a small, crystalline object suspended inside a transparent stasis field. The prism core pulsed gently with inner light, bluish, complex, alive in a way that made the air around it feel thinner. This is what I carry, she said quietly. This is what people are willing to kill for. Daxon approached, eyes narrowing. Some kind of data crystal? Not just data, she replied. Genetic research. Unfiltered. Uncensored. It proves that Xariun and Terrans share more biological compatibility than either of our governments have acknowledged. He looked at her, not with disbelief, but with calculation. Viable crossbreeding. Yes. Confirmed and repeatable. The implications are, she exhaled, extinction or alliance, depending on who you ask. Let me guess, Daxon said, tone flat. The wrong people know you have it. She nodded once. If this information reaches the wrong hands, it could be weaponized or buried forever. But if we get to Ambassador Cellora at Unity Spire, she can present it to the dual councils simultaneously. Make it public before anyone can suppress it. Daxon studied the prism core a moment longer. So this isn't a simple escort. It's a race against every damn faction that wants to keep their power intact. And a death sentence if we fail, she said. He turned to face her, expression unreadable. You trust me with this? I don't have the luxury of trust, Nisra said. Only necessity. Silence lingered between them, humming in the charged air between soldier and mercenary, between Xariun and Terran. Finally, Daxon gave a slow nod. Then let's make sure this thing sees the light of day. She resealed the compartment and keyed in a biometric lock. The prism core vanished behind layers of reinforced plating. The mission wasn't just official now, it was personal. 12 hours into their journey, the stars outside the cockpit had shifted, brighter, closer, almost predatory. Daxon sat in the pilot's chair, one boot up on the console, posture relaxed but eyes razor-sharp. He watched the NAV screen flash, a crimson warning, as the ship approached the edge of the Oblivion Belt. Looks like you weren't kidding, he muttered. We're flying straight into a minefield. Nisra entered the bridge, her armor now fully visible beneath the travel cloak. Her expression, as always, was calm to the point of severity. It's the most direct route. Every other corridor has active scans from Vorn Legion patrols. Daxon glanced at her sideways. And you'd rather deal with vacuum-borne predators than your own people. She didn't answer. That was answer enough. The Oblivion Belt stretched across the NAV display like a coiled serpent, dozens of kilometers wide, packed with drifting rocks, magnetic anomalies, and, more concerningly, life forms that had adapted to the void. Void claws nest in this belt, Daxon said, tapping the screen. I've read Terran recon reports. These things don't just track emissions, they coordinate attacks. Hunt in silence. Like wolves. I've prepared countermeasures, Nisra replied. Energy dampeners. Reduced thermal output. Silent mode thrust. He gave her a look. I've seen void claws tear through civilian freighters wrapped in stealth plating. You don't outrun them. You survive them. She crossed her arms. You have a better plan? He leaned forward. Yeah. Don't fly into places named after death. The silence between them crackled with tension, and for a moment, neither moved. Then the ship's alert system pulsed twice, proximity sensors picking up erratic motion on the outer perimeter. Nisra tapped a command into the console. We're already inside the belt. If they're out there, they've sensed us. Daxon exhaled through his nose. Of course they have. Outside, in the vast blackness, something moved. Fast and low, too smooth to be debris, too large to be ignored. Strap in, he said, flipping switches. This is about to get loud. Nisra slid into the co-pilot's seat, her hand already on the weapons control panel. Let's make them regret noticing us. The first jolt was subtle, more a whisper in the hull than a violent shake. But Daxon felt it immediately. His fingers froze over the controls, instincts flaring. He'd flown through gravity storms and plasma fields, and he knew the difference between turbulence and sabotage. The second jolt left no room for doubt. The ship lurched hard, throwing Nisra forward against her harness. Warning klaxons howled as red indicators lit up across the console. Engine 3 is failing, Daxon snapped, fingers flying across the interface. Diagnostics show no mechanical fault. This was deliberate. Nisra's expression shifted from focus to grim. I personally cleared and sealed this vessel. Then someone's good, he muttered. Because this wasn't just bad luck. It's precision, time targeted. They wanted us crippled mid-belt. He slammed the emergency override, rerouting power to stabilize the ship. The vessel groaned in protest as inertial dampeners struggled to keep pace. Outside the viewport, asteroids slid past like jagged shadows. Something in the darkness moved fast. Nisra leaned forward. Life supports fluctuating. Deck 2's already venting atmosphere. Daxon cursed under his breath. If we lose another system, we're dead in space. We need to put down. Fast. There's a charted emergency zone on Thaler, she said, bringing up planetary telemetry. Rough terrain. Disputed territory. But it's our only shot. He didn't like it. Everything about this mission had reeked of layered intentions since the start. But grounding the ship was better than exploding mid-air. He keyed in descent vectors. Strap in. This'll be bumpy. The descent wasn't just bumpy, it was violent. Flames licked the outer hull as they pierced the upper atmosphere of Thaler, the heat shielding barely holding. Daxon fought the controls like a man wrestling a beast. Beside him, Nisra gripped her harness but didn't flinch. Her calm in chaos was unsettling and strangely reassuring. They hit the clearing hard. The ship skidded across cracked ground before the landing gear finally caught and held. Smoke curled from the vents, and the power core hummed with uneven rhythm. Daxon powered down the systems. We're grounded. No chance of flight without full repair. And something tells me we're not welcome here. Nisra unbuckled her harness. We gather only what's essential. The prism core is priority. He stood, grabbing his gear. You still think this is about science? She turned sharply. What are you implying? He met her gaze, cool and steady. I'm implying someone knew our route, knew our systems. This wasn't just sabotage, it was a message. Someone on your side wants you silenced. For a moment, the commander's mask cracked. Doubt flickered in her eyes, doubt and something colder. I trust only one thing right now, she said quietly. The mission. Good, Daxon replied, checking the charge on his weapon. Because the mission's about to get real ugly. They stepped into the alien forest together, the smoldering wreck of their ship behind them, and 100 questions ahead. The forest on Thaler wasn't dead, but it breathed like it remembered war. Bioluminescent vines coiled around jagged trees, their pale blue light pulsing like veins beneath skin. Strange spores floated on air currents too subtle to feel, drifting like silent ghosts between trunks twisted by centuries of gravity anomalies. The ground underfoot was soft, but not natural, like something had bled here long ago and never stopped. Daxon scanned the canopy with a thermal reader. Nothing but shifting heat blooms and ambient haze. "It's quiet," he muttered. "Too quiet," Nisra said, not looking back. She moved with purpose, her posture rigid but fluid, a soldier trained to suppress every sound but still become the terrain. Her armor whispered against underbrush, blending with the breeze and distant rustling. Daxon followed, his rifle slung across his chest, fingers resting near the trigger. He wasn't a man who spooked easily, but this place set his instincts on edge. Not from the dark, from what wasn't in it. No chirping, no insect chatter, no natural life signs at all. He paused by a fungal outgrowth the size of a boulder. This planet was in dispute for a reason. Nobody claims land like this unless it's valuable or dangerous. Sometimes both, Nisra replied. She stopped near a warped tree, tapping her wrist console. The map flickered. Signal interference. "We're being watched," Daxon said suddenly. "It's not paranoia. My gut hasn't been wrong since Virex Prime." Nisra didn't argue. Instead, her hand moved to her sidearm, thumb resting just above the hilt. Her luminous eyes scanned the tree-line, her breath even. "Since we left the wreck," she said quietly, "I've felt it too." They continued without speaking. Every step was a question, every shadow a dare. Daxon noticed how her stride adjusted slightly, closer to his. Not from fear, from strategy. They were being hunted, not openly, not with noise, but the forest knew. It watched with eyes they couldn't see, waited with breath they couldn't hear. At a small ridge, Nisra crouched. "We're 2 hours from the outpost," she said, voice low. "We keep moving. Don't stop. Not unless we're forced." Daxon nodded once, jaw tight. Behind them, in a shifting glow of bioluminescence, something moved without moving. A ripple through space. A whisper of death. And neither of them turned. Yet, the first sound wasn't a growl. It was a click. Sharp, deliberate, like metal tapping against stone. Daxon stopped mid-step, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward the noise. "Left ridge. 30 meters. Something's flanking us." Nisra didn't hesitate. Her sidearm was out. Energy cell charged, finger hovering just above the trigger. Her gaze swept the underbrush, locking on shifting shadows that weren't there a moment ago. Then came another click, closer this time, and another from the opposite side. "They're surrounding us," she muttered. Daxon slung his rifle around, bringing the scope to his eye. 4, maybe 5 heat signatures. Low to the ground, moving fast. The moment he said it, the forest exploded. A void claw lunged from the foliage, its exoskeleton gleaming like obsidian steel under the bioluminescent canopy. 6 limbs, serrated and bladed, drove straight toward Nisra's position. She fired twice, the energy blasts grazing the creature's shoulder before it twisted midair and landed behind her. Daxon moved faster. He was on the creature before it turned, driving a solid punch into its thorax. The impact sounded like cracking metal, and the void claw shrieked, an awful insectoid scream. Daxon grabbed one of its limbs, twisted hard, and tore it clean off. Another void claw charged from the right. Nisra pivoted, dropped to a knee, and fired a clean shot through its midsection, but it didn't stop. The thing barreled into her, sending both tumbling to the ground in a blur of limbs and armor. Daxon reacted without thought. He crossed the clearing in 3 strides and grabbed the creature by the back of its head, fingers finding the natural ridges between armored plates. With a grunt, he pried, bones, muscle, and cartilage straining under the force, until something gave way with a sickening crack. The void claw collapsed in a twitching heap. Nisra rolled to her feet, her lips split and blood on her brow. She stared at him, not in shock, but in calculation. Another scream cut through the air as a third creature leapt from above. Daxon turned too late. It collided with him full force, slamming him against the forest floor. Claws raked across his jacket, tearing fabric, exposing the pale synthetic layer of subdermal plating beneath. The creature shrieked again, but then went silent as Daxon's hand closed around its neck. With a roar, he surged upward, lifting the creature with both hands, and drove its spine first into a tree trunk with enough force to split bark and shatter the Void Claw's exoskeleton in a burst of iridescent fluid. Two more creatures hesitated at the tree lean. Wrong move. Nisra lifted her rifle and fired in controlled bursts. One dropped, chest blown open. The other turned to flee, but Daxon was already in motion. He launched forward with terrifying speed, tackled the creature mid-run, and tore into it like a machine built for war. And for a moment, he didn't stop. Not until Nisra's voice cut through the static in his mind. Daxon, it's over. His breath was ragged, hands dripping, eyes unfocused. Then, slowly he rose. His pupils contracted, his jaw clenched, and something close to silence returned to the forest. Nisra stared at the carnage, the shredded bodies, the glistening fluid, the trees broken by bare hands, and then at the man in front of her. He wasn't just Terran. He was something else. Nisra's weapon lowered slowly, her fingers still hovering near the trigger as she watched Daxon step away from the mangled corpse of the last Void Claw. The blood on his arms glistened in shades of violet and blue, alien fluid clinging to his skin like some ritual marking. She had fought in border conflicts, watched platoons of Xariun elites fall to plasma fire, even faced down kinetic rift artillery, but she had never seen anything like this. Not from a Terran. Not from any sentient species. Are you injured? She asked, though the question felt absurd. Daxon didn't answer immediately. His chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate control as he wiped a hand down his face and flung the residue into the underbrush. No, he finally said. Not really. Not really, she echoed. His tone was casual, but his body betrayed something else. A quiet tension coiled beneath the surface, not born of fear, but restraint. Daxon, she said carefully, what are you? He looked at her then, for a long moment, the storm behind his gray eyes finally stilling. Human, he said, but not unaltered. Nisra stepped closer, her expression unreadable. This isn't just battlefield conditioning. You took down armored predators with your bare hands. Daxon gave a short nod, as if confirming the unspoken. I was part of something called Project Erection, Terran black budget program. Bio-augmented infantry. We weren't built to fight wars. We were built to end them. She blinked. The name triggered something buried deep in her strategic briefings. That project was decommissioned, shut down after ethical violations. Ethics weren't the goal, he replied. Results were. Nisra took another step forward, studying the fine scars on his arms, the strange sheen beneath the skin where flesh met augmentation. You're not just strong. You're fast, adaptable, relentless. That's why you're still alive. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Yeah, but it's also why they tried to erase us. She crossed her arms. How many of you are left? 3 survived the final phase, he said, voice low. I haven't heard from the others in years. They either went underground or didn't make it. Silence lingered between them. The forest had gone still again, and yet nothing felt calm. You should have told me, she said. You would have walked away. Nisra considered that, then shook her head. No, but I would have understood the risk sooner. Daxon looked out into the trees. You still want to keep going? Her answer came without pause. The mission doesn't change. But now, I know who's walking beside me. They moved in silence through the dense undergrowth, their pace steady, their weapons ready. But something had changed. The forest no longer felt like the greatest threat. Nisra's wrist console blinked, an encrypted alert she hadn't expected, not in this sector, not from this source. She stopped beneath the twisted limbs of a glowing thistle tree and brought the display to life. Zenda Elda Murat. Priority Ultra. Subject. Termination Protocol initiated. Message. You have been marked for traitor classification. Commander Tharek has authorized full containment. Do not return to Xariun space. Trust no one. Her pulse slowed, but not from calm. Daxon noticed the shift in her body language. What is it? Nisra closed the message with a flick of her fingers. Orders changed, she said flatly. Yours or theirs? She looked at him, not answering. The expression in her eyes, once focused and sharp, had dulled into something colder. Distant. Calculating. Let me guess, Daxon said, stepping closer. That wasn't a mission update. That was a death warrant. She didn't deny it. They're burning the trail behind you, he continued. Standard protocol. Make it look like you went rogue. That way, no one asks why you're really carrying the Prism Core. Nisra nodded once, eyes fixed on a horizon only she could see. They never intended for the data to reach Unity Spire. I was never supposed to survive Thaler. That's why the ship was sabotaged, Daxon muttered. It wasn't an accident. It was cleanup. The realization settled between them like ash. Nisra clenched her jaw. Elder Myrith trained me. She raised me when my parents were killed in the Rift conflicts. I trusted her. She probably thinks she's protecting something bigger than you, Daxon said. That's the excuse people always use when they betray someone who trusted them. Nisra looked down at the console again, then at Daxon. Everything I believed in, the chain of command, the honor, the structure, it's unraveling. And yet you're still standing, Daxon said. She didn't speak, but in the set of her shoulders, the cold edge of her voice, he saw it clearly. Nisra wasn't breaking. She was shifting. Night had fallen hard over Thaler. The canopy overhead shimmered with bioluminescent hues, soft pulses of green and blue flickering like heartbeat rhythms across the forest floor. A narrow rock overhang sheltered them for the night, barely tall enough to sit upright, barely wide enough for two. Nisra sat cross-legged near the edge, staring at the flickering embers of a low-burning heat cell wedged between stones. Her armor was off now, stacked neatly beside her. A sealed bandage circled her arm from the earlier Void Claw encounter. She hadn't spoken in nearly an hour. Daxon sat nearby, leaning back against the stone wall, a ration bar half-eaten in his hand. His shirt was torn at the collar, exposing the edges of those faint surgical lines she'd noticed before, marked from procedures Terrans weren't supposed to survive. Finally, Nisra broke the silence. Do you remember the moment you stopped trusting the people who made you? Daxon didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the dark trees, scanning for movement. Yeah, he said eventually. The day they activated the kill switch on my unit. Called it asset containment. Nisra looked at him. But you lived? Barely, he said. Only because I was one step ahead of the trigger man. Another silence stretched between them. But this time it wasn't sharp. It was something quieter, fragile. I believed in Xariun superiority, she said, voice low. Raised on it, trained to embody it. We were told humans were unpredictable, emotional, dangerous. That alliances were strategic at best, never lasting. And now? Daxon asked, his tone almost gentle. She looked at him. Now I'm sitting in a forest on a hostile world, hiding from my own people, next to the only person who didn't lie to me. He gave a small chuckle, dry but sincere. Not sure didn't lie is a great compliment. It is, she said, and for once her lips curved into the smallest smile. Their eyes met. No rank between them now, no borders of blood or species or programming. Just two broken pieces of something larger, trying to make sense of a universe that had weaponized them both. Nisra reached out, brushing her fingers against the scar across his brow. It was a quiet touch, nothing more than a breath across skin, but it said everything she didn't know how to voice. Daxon didn't move. He just watched her, waited. Let her choose. I was never allowed to feel anything beyond duty, she whispered. He leaned in, slow, steady, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, uncertain, then deeper, warmer. A signal through every nerve ending that maybe, despite everything, this moment was real. When they finally parted, Nisra rested her forehead against his. Tomorrow, she said softly, we move again. Daxon's hand found hers. Together. Morning on Thaler didn't bring comfort, just a colder kind of silence. Mist clung low to the forest floor, curling around the underbrush like a living thing. Nisra sat just outside the makeshift shelter her breath fogging in the air as she stared at her wrist console, waiting. The transmission finally arrived. Encrypted, unmistakable, a private channel only one person still alive could have used. Elder Myrith. Nisra hesitated before opening it. Her finger hovered over the activation rune like it burned. The message played in a clipped, urgent tone. Mira's voice flat, emotionless, like she were reading an order instead of speaking to the girl she once raised. Commander Tharek has declared you compromised. Your access to Unity Spire is revoked. Charges of treason and collusion with Terran extremists have been filed under emergency protocol. This message is not sanctioned. Do not respond. Do not return. Then it ended. No signature. No warning. Just a cold drop of finality in Nisra's chest. She lowered her wrist slowly, blinking hard against a sting that had nothing to do with the chill. Behind her, Daxon stirred. He was already half awake, one hand on his weapon, even before his eyes opened. A habit, not a decision. His gaze found her immediately. Bad news. She didn't answer right away. Her voice came quieter than usual, like it wasn't meant to carry. They've cut me off. Cut off how? I'm marked a traitor. She swallowed. Commander Therex made it official. Daxon sat up, running a hand down his face. That's fast. Too fast. We're barely a day out from the drop site, which means they planned this. Nisra nodded, jaw clenched. They never intended for the Prism Corps to reach the councils. I was never supposed to get this far. And now they're framing you as a collaborator, Daxon muttered. Classic burn the bridge tactic. Makes whatever happens to you look like justice. Nisra's eyes dropped to the damp soil beneath her boots. They'll say I sold the data, that I betrayed Xarian sovereignty, and some will believe it. Daxon stood and walked to her, quiet as the forest itself. So what now, Commander? She looked up at him, the weight of years and loyalty collapsing behind her eyes. Now I stop running toward orders, she said, and start moving toward the truth. A low rumble echoed in the distance. Thunder, or something worse. Whatever it was, it didn't matter anymore. Nisra was no longer on anyone's leash, and that made her dangerous. The dropship cut through Thaler's lower atmosphere with a shuddering groan. It was a patched-together smuggler's craft, unarmed, underpowered, but fast enough to reach low orbit if the winds held steady. Nisra sat in the co-pilot's seat, one hand gripping the restraint harness, eyes fixed on the shifting storm front outside. Beside her, Daxon monitored the NAV console, lips pressed into a hard line. Too quiet, he muttered, scanning the radar again. No petrols, no chatter, no sky traffic. Either we got lucky, or we're walking into a net. Nisra didn't respond. She'd been running calculations in her head since takeoff. Angles of interception, fuel margins, fallback trajectories. None of them ended clean. We make it to high altitude, she said. We can initiate a subspace ping to Ambassador Cellora. Encrypted. Direct. If we make it, Daxon replied flatly. A sudden tone pierced the cabin. Proximity alert. Daxon's eyes narrowed. We got movement. 3 signatures. Vectoring in fast. He punched the scanner to full power. The results came back like a slap. Vorn Legion interceptors. Nisra's guts sank. The elite strike wing of the Xariun military. Units only deployed when surgical precision was needed. Not search parties. Not scare tactics. Kill teams. Evasive, she snapped. Daxon didn't need the order. The dropship banked hard, engines groaning in protest as he dove into the clouds. Plasma trails streaked past the cockpit as the first salvo came in. They're not warning shots, he said. They want us dead or in pieces, she replied, strapping in tighter. Not captured, not tried, just erased. Another blast rocked the ship, sending sparks from the rear systems panel. An alarm screamed about overheating stabilizers. Rerouting power, Daxon said through gritted teeth. But we're losing altitude. Divert to the canyon below, Nisra ordered. We used terrain to break lock on. The ship dove low, scraping against the rocky spires of Thaler's fractured landscape. Below them, jagged cliffs split into narrow ravines, a labyrinth of stone and shadow. The Vorn Legion ships followed, relentless. Suddenly, the rear thruster gave out. A burst of flame erupted from the aft engine. "We're hit," Daxon shouted. "Can't keep us airborne." The ship plummeted. They slammed into the canyon floor with bone-jarring force. The hull screeched as metal tore across rock. Systems died one after another in a cascade of sparks and smoke. When it was over, silence pressed in like a scream. Nisra coughed, unbuckling herself from the twisted harness. Her vision spun, ears ringing. Through the haze, she saw Daxon pulling himself upright, bleeding from the temple, but conscious. He was already reaching for his weapon. "Move," he rasped, but it was too late. The side hatch blew open, and a wave of armored soldiers stormed inside. Vorn Legion. Fast, efficient, silent. Stun rounds fired before Nisra could lift her pistol. She dropped, convulsing. Daxon surged forward, but 5 rifles snapped to center mass. He froze. One of the soldiers stepped forward, voice cold through his helmet. "Daxon Rel, by order of Chancellor Virex, you are hereby detained under Directive Protocol 7. You will be transported to Facility X7 for examination." Nisra tried to speak, tried to scream, but darkness swallowed her whole. The last thing she saw was Daxon being dragged toward a shuttle, arms bound, eyes locked on hers. And then, nothing. Facility X7 was a ghost of a place. Silent corridors, dim white light, and cold walls that smelled of chemicals and sterilized secrets. It wasn't built for justice. It was built to take people apart. Daxon hung from a grav-restraint rig, wrists locked above his head, feet barely touching the floor. Blood crusted along his hairline where the stun baton had split skin. His jacket was gone, shirt torn open at the seams to expose the faint circuitry beneath his skin. Surgical seams left behind by Project Virection. Someone had tried to peel back the layers. They hadn't gotten far. "Vitals stable," said a voice behind the glass observation panel. Dr. Havek stood there, flanked by 2 assistants in lab-gray uniforms. He was older than Daxon expected, stooped, with silver cybernetic implants running from jaw to temple, but his eyes were sharp. "Cruel. The augmentation is stable, despite years in the field," Havek murmured. "Resilience patterns are intact. Genetic degradation minimal." He looked fascinated, like a child studying a puzzle. Daxon met his gaze through the glass. "You can poke and prod all you want, document. You're not going to find anything you can control." Havek smiled. "I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to replicate you." Outside, unnoticed, something moved in the ventilation system. Something fast, quiet. Nisra. She'd awoken in a cell 2 floors below, wrists still tingling from the stun pulse. But within minutes, she'd mapped the patrols, hacked the door using a broken guard's comm link, and slipped into the facility's maintenance ducts. Her body still ached from the crash, but pain had no place in her mind now. Only one thought remained. Get him out. She dropped from the ceiling silently, landing behind the 2 guards posted near the chamber. A blade flicked from her wrist brace, silent and sharp. 2 quick strikes. 2 thuds. She pressed her palm to the door's override panel. The lights dimmed inside. Daxon's head lifted at the sound of the door hissing open. Nisra stepped through, plasma pistol in one hand, the other already punching commands into the restraint system. "Am I hallucinating?" Daxon asked, his voice hoarse. "Not yet," she replied. "But you will be if we don't move." The restraints disengaged with a sharp clack, and Daxon slumped forward. She caught him under the arm, hoisting him up with a grunt. "Facility lockdown will trigger in 90 seconds, she said. He staggered, then stood fully on his own. "Give me a weapon." She handed him a sidearm, then pointed toward the service lift. Evac routes through the east wing. Emergency hangar. They moved fast, firing only when necessary. Security drones fell with precision shots. Cameras blinked and went dark, overridden by Nisra's stolen access codes. Alarm klaxons screamed behind them, but they didn't slow. By the time they reached the hangar, Daxon had recovered enough to take point. He blasted the final door open and cleared the deck while Nisra sprinted to the shuttle controls. "Systems primed," she shouted. "We've got fuel and atmospheric clearance." Daxon slammed the hatch closed behind them as the first wave of reinforcements entered the corridor. Then we don't wait. The shuttle roared to life as Nisra took the pilot's seat, hands dancing across the controls. "Where are we going?" Daxon asked, strapping in beside her. She glanced sideways. "Somewhere they won't follow. But first, we're sending the data." Daxon nodded. "Then let's make sure we're alive to see what it changes." And together, they blasted into the dark, carrying the truth the galaxy had tried to erase. The shuttle punched through the atmosphere with violent force, hull groaning under the strain as Nisra pushed the thrusters to their limits. Alarms blinked angrily across the console, but she ignored them. Altitude was rising. Velocity was climbing. But they weren't alone. "We've got company," Daxon growled, staring at the rear scope. 3 interceptors inbound. Vorn Legion signatures. Nisra swore under her breath. "They were waiting for us. They tracked the escape. That facility wasn't a secret. It was bait. Then they took the wrong kind of prey." She kicked the shuttle into a hard roll, narrowly avoiding a plasma barrage that scorched past their starboard wing. The rear shields flared red. Daxon manned the weapon controls, returning fire with calculated bursts, forcing the interceptors to break formation. But it wouldn't hold. "They're faster," he said. "We can't outrun them in a straight line." "I know," Nisra said. Her voice was calm, but her fingers moved fast, setting a new course, rerouting power, scanning space beyond the planetary orbit. "There's an asteroid field 6 clicks out. Low density, high spread." Daxon grinned through clenched teeth. "Of course there is. Think you can fly tight? Can you hold your stomach?" The shuttle dove low, racing toward the chaotic mass of spinning rock and frozen debris that hung like a storm of stone between worlds. Behind them, the Vor interceptors closed in, weapons hot, formation tight. As they entered the field, Nisra throttled down to minimum signature. Daxon dropped decoy drones, scattering false engine trails. Plasma blasts lit up the rocks around them, but none found their target. The first interceptor clipped a tumbling boulder and disintegrated in a flash of fire and dust. "One down," Daxon muttered. The remaining 2 spread out, adjusting to the terrain. Smarter than Nisra hoped. A bolt slammed into the rear of the shuttle. Systems flickered. A warning flashed across the screen. "Shield integrity critical." "We won't make it to Unity Spire," she said. "Not intact." Daxon looked at her, jaw clenched. "Then we send the data now." Nisra hesitated only a second, then pulled the prism core from its containment vault. The blue glow pulsed in her hands, steady, fragile, dangerous. She connected it to the ship's comm relay, fingers moving through layers of encryption protocols. Linking to Ambassador Solora's private channel. Quantum burst transmission. One-time window. Daxon stayed quiet. There was nothing to add. Either the truth would reach the councils, or they would die trying. The upload bar appeared. 1%, 12%, 34%. "Faster," Daxon muttered. "I'm not the bandwidth," she shot back. 67%, 84%. A second blast rocked the shuttle. Flames erupted from the port engine. The ship spun, tumbling end over end through the field. Nisra wrestled the controls, fighting to stabilize. 93%, 97%. Just a few more seconds. The last interceptor closed in, weapons locked, charge building. Nisra could see it through the viewport. Sleek, silent, merciless. Then, upload complete. Nisra yanked the core from the relay, cutting the connection. "It's out," she breathed. Daxon's eyes narrowed. But we're still in the crosshairs. They braced as the interceptor's weapons flared, and were suddenly swallowed by shadow. A massive silhouette dropped from hyperspace above them. Gunmetal gray, angular, bristling with Terran firepower. The ISS Valiant. Comm crackled to life. "This is Captain Renix. Stand by for retrieval. You're not dying today." The Valiant's cannons fired. The interceptor never stood a chance. The ISS Valiant loomed like a guardian above the wreckage of the stars, its hull casting shadows across the battered shuttle as it locked into docking alignment. Emergency lights flared to life along the bay corridor, and the hiss of the magnetic seal completed with a dull thump. Inside the shuttle, Nisra slumped back in her seat, sweat cooling against her neck. Her hand still gripped the flight controls, knuckles white. "We're clear," Daxon said, watching the proximity screen blink green. The transmission made it. The Valiant's guns made sure we're still breathing. Nisra exhaled, but it wasn't relief. Not yet. We bought time. That's all. Moments later, the hatch opened. Boarding clamps engaged, and a squad of Terran security personnel in polished armor stepped aboard. At their center stood a weathered woman with a steel cybernetic eye and the posture of someone who had never once backed away from a fight. "Captain Renix," Daxon said, straightening. "Took you long enough." The captain raised an eyebrow. "I heard you were hard to kill. Thought I'd test the rumor." Nisra stood, meeting the woman's gaze. "We need containment protocols. The Prism Core is on board. We can't risk interception." Renix nodded, already motioning to her officers. "It's being moved to deep storage as we speak. Your transmission to Ambassador Cellora was received. It's already been decrypted and flagged for review by the dual councils." Daxon and Nisra exchanged a glance, equal parts shock and dread. "So, it's happening," Nisra said quietly. "Oh, it's happening," Renix replied. "You just rewrote the political fault lines of two civilizations." Daxon holstered his weapon. "Then what happens to us?" "You're both loose ends," Renix said, not unkindly, but useful ones. Terran Command wants to offer sanctuary. New identities, new start. Assuming you're not suicidal enough to go back into Xariun space. Nisra looked down at her blood-streaked armor, then back at Daxon. "And the councils? They'll tear themselves apart, deciding what to do next," Renix said. "But the core's out. The lie is broken." A long silence stretched between them as the weight of everything they'd done, everything they'd survived, settled over their shoulders. Finally, Nisra asked, "And us? Where are we now?" Renix gave a faint smile. "Proof that sometimes the most dangerous truths don't come from weapons or fleets, but from two people who refuse to die quietly." The chamber of the dual councils had not fallen silent in over 2 decades. But now, as the Prism Core hovered mid-air, its pale blue light pulsing with encoded truths, a hush rippled through the amphitheater like a seismic wave. Ambassador Cellora stood beneath the data sphere, her voice even but her eyes betraying tension. "This is not speculation. It's evidence. Genetic compatibility between Xariun and Terrans, verified through cross-phase cellular resonance. This changes everything." The implication struck harder than any fleet could. Interbreeding between their species wasn't just possible. It had been known, buried, and concealed. Nisra's encrypted upload, sent from the brink of destruction aboard the ISS Valiant, had reached them just hours earlier. And now, every council member had seen it. Chancellor Virex's chair sat empty, its absence louder than words. Commander Tharek, too, was notably missing. But Elder Myrith had arrived, face drawn, shoulders rigid as if sculpted from stone. Murmurs turned into arguments. Some called for immediate investigation into suppressed history. Others cried foul, accusing the Terrans of genetic manipulation. A few demanded war. In the viewing chamber above, Nisra stood beside Daxon, watching it unfold through polarized glass. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, like a war drum echoing in her chest. "Do you think they'll listen?" Daxon asked, his voice low. "They're listening now," she replied. "What they do with it, that's the real threat." Down below, Cellora continued, her voice rising to pierce the chaos. "This council cannot ignore what's before us. Unity or division, those are the only outcomes. But the lie cannot remain." The Prism Core's light pulsed brighter, then dimmed to stillness, as if holding its breath. Across the stars, ripple effects had already begun. Fleet mobilization stalled. Diplomatic missions recalled. And in the shadowy corners of the galaxy, opportunists sharpened their blades. Not for truth, but for power. For Nisra and Daxon, it was no longer a matter of survival. It was a countdown. Because when the truth erupts into the open, the galaxy doesn't always bend toward justice. Sometimes it burns first. The halls of Unity's spire pulsed with unrest. As the data from the Prism core spread like wildfire across systems, responses came swift and sharp. Some expected, others far more dangerous. Within hours, the names of Elder Myrith and Chancellor Virex were etched into sealed warrants. Betrayal, obstruction, and treason were just the beginning. The dual councils had moved faster than anyone predicted. Ships from the Eastern Concordance arrived in orbit, locking down stations known to house classified biological research. Myrith was detained in his private compound on Talaron Prime without resistance. Virex, however, had vanished. Ambassador Selora stood before the council chamber again, a different energy in her voice this time. Not revelation, but urgency. Power has corrupted even the highest among us, she declared, her voice resonating through every audio feed on Xariun channels. But we must separate the corrupt from the truth. Across the viewing deck, Nisra watched as soldiers in white-trimmed armor, the council's elite enforcers, marched Elder Myrith into custody. The once respected Elder didn't struggle. He didn't plead. He only stared directly at the camera feed, as if issuing a silent warning to someone watching from the shadows. Daxon leaned forward, arms crossed. One down. Nisra shook her head. One caught. Therek's still out there, and he's not one to go quietly. Commander Therek had gone dark. Intelligence feeds suggested he had abandoned his command post on Siren outpost hours before the Prism Core broadcast. Some claimed he was heading toward fringe territories where loyalty could still be bought. Others feared he had allies deep within the council itself. Across the stars, Xariun society began to fracture. Some hailed the revelation as a new dawn. Others saw it as sacrilege. Old allegiances were breaking, new ones forming in real time. For every elder that supported open discourse, there was a warlord readying weapons. As ships shifted in formation and messages grew colder in tone, one thing became clear. This wasn't a ripple in politics. It was a fault line, and when it cracked wide open, someone would fall in first. The briefing room aboard the ISS Valiant was dim, its lights set to privacy mode. Captain Renix stood before a projected star map, arms folded, eyes heavy with decisions made far too often in the shadows of larger wars. New identities, a clean slate. We can slip you both out through the Arcturus corridor within 30 hours, he said calmly. No more running, no more chasing ghosts. Nisra sat still, her jaw clenched, fingers interlocked. Daxon leaned against the bulkhead nearby, saying nothing. The hum of the ship's systems filled the silence between them. It was tempting, deceptively so. Start over, disappear into the edges of the galaxy. Let the core fight its battles and watch from a safe distance. After all they'd endured, hadn't they earned that? But Nisra's thoughts were elsewhere. She remembered the faces in the council chamber, some shocked, some afraid, some already maneuvering to erase the truth once more. If she walked away now, the message of the Prism core might be buried again, swallowed by bureaucracy and fear. She looked to Daxon. Could you do it? Walk away. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the stars outside the viewport. I used to think survival was enough, he said at last. But if we disappear now, that's not surviving. That's surrendering. Renix exhaled slowly, then nodded, as if he'd expected this. Then you'll need more than courage. You'll need a war strategy. Outside, the Valiant cruised silently through space, its hull reflecting faint streaks of distant nebulae. The offer had been made and refused. They wouldn't run. They would stand, even if the galaxy chose to burn around them. Nisra stood alone at the edge of the observation deck, her eyes fixed on the swirl of stars beyond the glass. The Valiant drifted silently through neutral space, but inside her mind, the noise was deafening. She had worn the armor of the Xariun Vorn Legion with pride. Every scar, every command, every battle cry had been for honor, an honor now unraveled by the lies of those she once swore to serve. Commander Therek, Elder Myrith, even Chancellor Virex, they had built an empire on control, not unity. And she had been their weapon. Now, the weight of truth pressed against her ribs like gravity, she couldn't escape. The Prism Core had exposed what she didn't dare imagine, that Terrans and Xariun weren't enemies of biology, but of ideology. That Daxon, half broken, half alive, wasn't an aberration, but a key. She closed her eyes. What would her father have said if he were alive to see this moment? Would he have called her a traitor? Or worse, would he have agreed with the silence that followed every betrayal? Behind her, soft footsteps approached. She didn't turn, but she knew it was Daxon. "You're quiet," he said gently. "I was taught silence is strength," she replied. "But now I wonder if that's just another lie." Daxon stood beside her, not touching, not intruding, just present. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said. She gave a soft, almost bitter laugh. "That's the thing, Daxon. I don't know how not to." Stars moved slowly beyond the glass, like time itself pausing to listen. For the first time in years, Nisra wasn't sure who she was, warrior, traitor, or something entirely new. But one thing was certain. She wasn't done fighting. The chamber was smaller than Nisra remembered. The core atrium of Unity Spire once felt vast, grand, even intimidating. But now, standing in its center with Daxon at her side, it felt human-sized. Members of the dual councils filled the semicircular seats, their expressions a spectrum of disbelief, fear, and barely concealed hostility. Holographic feeds displayed live transmissions to other systems. Every word spoken here would ripple across empires. Nisra stepped forward. She no longer wore her Xariun uniform. She had chosen a simple cloak, gray with the seal of no allegiance. No longer a soldier. No longer a pawn. "I'm not here to ask for permission," she began, voice steady but firm. "I'm here to bear witness." A low murmur spread through the chamber. Daxon stood beside her, arms folded, face unreadable. She continued, "You call me a traitor for exposing a truth. But what greater betrayal is there than forcing your people to live in ignorance, hating what they could understand, fearing what they could one day love?" One of the counselors attempted to interrupt, but she raised her hand, not with authority, but with conviction. "You don't have to believe me," she said. "But believe this. History will not remember the silence of this council. It will remember who stood in this place and refused to lie." She looked to Daxon, then to the Prism Core, now projected for all to see. Its glow pulsed in quiet defiance. "We are not anomalies," she said, voice rising. "We are proof that a different future is possible." The chamber fell silent, and for the first time, it listened. The hum of the ISS Valiant was a low, comforting rhythm beneath Nisra's boots as she walked the dimly lit corridor. Beyond the viewport, the stars drifted by like silent witnesses to everything they had survived. Her fingers brushed the cold metal rail, but her mind was far from the steel walls of the Terran ship. It was with Daxon, in the way his voice lowered when she was afraid, the way he shielded her even when he was the one bleeding. She found him in the observation deck, sitting alone. The room was dark except for the soft pulse of navigation lights and the starlight pouring through the wide panoramic glass. Daxon didn't turn as she entered, but he spoke, his voice a rough whisper. "I used to look out there and wonder if anything I did would ever matter. If I die another ghost in a file, no one would read." Nisra stepped beside him, the air between them charged but gentle. "You already mattered. To me, long before I understood why." He turned, and in that moment, the hardened mercenary, the augmented weapon of a broken program, looked more human than ever. His eyes weren't just tired. They were searching. "I thought Xariun didn't believe in emotion," he said with a half-smile. She matched it. "We don't. But I'm not Xariun anymore. Not just that." A silence settled between them, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with all the things they had yet to say, and all the things they no longer needed to. Out there, the stars burned on, uncaring. But in here, two beings from worlds never meant to touch had found something neither war, nor data, nor politics could quantify. Nisra sat beside him, shoulders brushing. "When we're gone, when this ship becomes another story in the archives, I want them to know we didn't just fight. We felt. We chose." Daxon nodded slowly. "We lived." Their hands found each other without command or hesitation. Flesh and blood and something more. Scars, regrets, longing, and a quiet hope for a tomorrow they hadn't yet earned, but dared to imagine. Above them, the constellations wheeled on, indifferent and eternal. But somewhere between those stars, two souls, Xariun and Terran, had found a common orbit. The chamber was colder than expected. High ceilings, metallic walls, and a silence that seemed to weigh more than the gravity generators allowed. At the heart of the ISS Valiant's diplomatic wing stood the secure transmission hub, flickering with low blue light. Daxon and Nisera stood before the console, shoulders squared, eyes locked on the final data packet hovering in holographic form. The Prism Core's message, unfiltered and undeniable. "I encrypted it 3 ways, Daxon muttered, hands poised over the controls. "Once we send it, there's no walking it back." Nisera nodded, her eyes focused not on the data, but on the reflection of her own face in the glass. A soldier, a traitor, a witness. She had been all those things. But now, she was something else, someone who had chosen truth over comfort. "Let them see what we saw," she said softly. "Let them feel the weight of it." A deep breath passed between them, as if their lungs were synchronized. Daxon pressed the final command. The file zipped through secure relays toward the heart of Unity Spire, toward the dual councils, toward the chaos, the reckoning, the possibility. "Do you think they'll believe it?" Daxon asked. Nisera hesitated. "Some will. Others will try to bury it. But we've opened the door. And now..." She turned toward him, her voice steadier than she felt. "Now we step through it. Together." As they exited the chamber, the corridor lights flicked on ahead of them, one by one, like a path being written in real time. Behind them, the message surged across space, proof that Xariun and Terran weren't meant to fear each other, but to understand, maybe even evolve together. No more hiding, no more running. The future had been waiting, and now it had a face. In the quiet mess hall of the ISS Valiant, Nisera sat alone, staring at the insignia on her uniform. The crest of the Xariun military, once a symbol of honor, of duty, now felt like a chain around her throat. She unclasped it slowly, letting the metal disc fall in her palm, its weight heavier than she remembered. Across the room, Daxon watched her from a distance. His gear lay in pieces on the table beside him. Holsters, combat plates, the faded Ghost Division patch torn from his shoulder. He had stopped cleaning his weapons halfway through, as if realizing he no longer needed them to define who he was. Nisera turned toward him, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen. "I used to think loyalty meant obedience," she said. "But maybe real loyalty is to the truth, not the uniform." Daxon gave a quiet nod. "And maybe survival doesn't mean running from every cause worth fighting for." He stood and crossed the space between them, setting his old patch on the table beside her insignia. 2 relics of past lives, surrendered not in defeat, but in clarity. "We're not soldiers anymore," he said. "No," Nisera agreed. "We're something new." It wasn't a vow. It wasn't even a plan. But it was a start. Outside the viewport, the stars drifted past in long, slow streaks. For the first time in years, neither of them had a mission, a contract, or an order to follow. There was no briefing, no debrief. Just a shared silence and the thrum of the ship beneath their feet. They didn't need orders anymore. They had each other, in a direction built on choice, not command. They stood in the observation dome of the ISS Valiant, surrounded by silence and stars. The aftershocks of everything they'd endured, traitors unmasked, truths revealed, and lives nearly lost, still hummed beneath the surface. But for this moment, the galaxy felt quiet. Daxon leaned against the curved glass, arms folded, eyes scanning the constellations. "We could disappear," he murmured. "Pick a system no one's heard of. Live a life no one's watching." Nisera didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was fixed on a cluster of stars near the edge of the charted sectors. Her hand rested lightly over the Prism Core, now safely encrypted in a containment pouch. "We've already set a wave in motion," she said. "The councils know the truth. Maybe change will come, maybe not. But we've done our part." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "So what now?" Where do warriors go when there's no war left? She smiled faintly. They stopped being warriors. That answer lingered between them, simple but seismic. They had both been shaped by orders, missions, survival instincts honed in fire. Now they had to unlearn the battlefield and learn something more fragile, something like peace. Daxon exhaled slowly. I know a planet. Eden 9. Lush. Remote. No military presence. Locals don't care who you are as long as you bring seeds and stories. Nisra raised a brow. You have a retirement plan? Let's call it a backup life I never thought I'd live. They exchanged a look, and something unspoken passed. Trust, possibility, hope. Not in grand revolutions or declarations, but in something quieter. The idea that two people from opposing worlds could build a life together, somewhere no one expected them to. We'll go, Nisra said at last. After the testimony, after the final piece is done. He nodded, and together they turned from the stars, not to run, but to walk forward into a future of their own choosing. The stars stretched endlessly across the viewport like threads of possibility, scattered across the black tapestry of space. Daxon and Nisra stood side by side, the soft hum of the ISS Valiant surrounding them, distant from the political storms they had set into motion. They didn't speak for a long time. Words had become secondary. Everything that mattered had already been said. Nisra's fingers gently brushed against Daxon's, not seeking reassurance, but offering quiet certainty. Do you think they'll listen? She finally asked, eyes still locked on the stars. Maybe not today, Daxon replied. But someday, truth doesn't vanish just because people fear it. They had delivered the Prism Core. They had testified. They had survived. What came next wasn't theirs to control, but it was no longer theirs to carry alone. Behind them, voices echoed faintly down the corridor. Diplomats arguing, officers debating, scientists dissecting the data they'd brought. The galaxy was stirring, and though chaos might follow, so would change. I used to believe in duty, Nisra said, her voice soft. Now I believe in choice. Daxon gave a half-smile. I used to believe I had none. The silence returned, but this time it was warm, comforting. They looked up together, not at any particular star, not searching for directions or destinies, but simply looking. Because somewhere out there was Eden 9. Somewhere out there was a place where no one knew their names, where no one cared who was Xariun or Terran, where a child could be born without fear, and love could exist without politics. The war was behind them. What lay ahead was whatever they chose to build. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If this story made you feel something, even just a little, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, or sharing it with someone you love. More stories are on the way, and I'll be right here, ready to tell the next one whenever you're ready to listen.